In 1975, author Roderick Thorpe had a dream after seeing The Towering Inferno about a man being chased through a skyscraper by armed henchmen. 4 years later, he published a novel called Nothing Lasts Forever, about a retired NYPD cop visiting his daughter at her LA office building on Christmas Eve, when it's taken over by German terrorists. He decided to restructure this book as a sequel to his most famous novel, The Detective, in the hopes that Frank Sinatra, who had starred in the film adaptation of The Detective, would sign on for a second movie. By the time the movie version was being produced in the late 1980s, Sinatra was 70 years old and declined. So they changed the character's name to John McClane, made it his wife instead of his daughter, and after running through all the usual action suspects, they cast Bruce Willis and renamed it Die Hard. Die Hard, of course, became a beloved action classic, and they pulled the same trick of shuttling John McClane into unrelated action stories into very successful sequels. Around the time of the release of the third Die Hard film, Sega had a surplus of game boards and a Die Hard license, but no Die Hard games. So in true franchise fashion, decided to slot John McClane into an existing framework that had almost nothing to do with him, and released the 3D beat-em-up Die Hard Arcade in 1996. When I say nothing to do with him, I mean it. Technically, the game is set in a skyscraper office building, but absolutely nothing else here has anything to do with the world of Die Hard. Unrecognizable greaser John McClane and his partner, a woman named Chris Thompson, fight through waves of cartoonish bad guys, including bikers, luchadors, and robot spiders who shoot lasers, led by a guy named Wolf Hongo. Your task is to save the absolute champion of random video game victims, the President's Daughter. Now you might be saying, I don't remember John McClane fighting a bunch of martial artists dressed like Riku from Kingdom Hearts so he could rescue the President's Daughter. Also, I don't remember John McClane having a partner. In fact, I believe that his lack of institutional support is a definitional part of Die Hard as a story. Well, you'd be right! And that's because this game was developed as an entirely unrelated project called Dynamite Deca, or literally Dynamite Detective. Because the Die Hard license, hilariously, didn't extend to Japan, so it was released as a completely different game there. All the reporting I can find claims that this was developed as a Die Hard game first and then retooled, and the Japanese protagonist being named Bruno seems to support this, but I just don't see why you'd try to make Die Hard and come up with this. Die Hard Arcade was a hit, though, and plans were made for a sequel, but by the time that game went into production, the Die Hard license had elapsed altogether. So Dynamite Deca 2 was released in the US as if it were a standalone, entirely unrelated game called Dynamite Cop. Which again makes sense because it had not a f***ing thing to do with Die Hard. Dynamite Cop keeps Bruno but switches out his partner for 2 new fighters, and in what I guess is a fitting tribute to the Die Hard series, has an impossibly identical plot to the first game, just set in a different locale. Guys! Wolf Hongo has kidnapped the President's Daughter again! And he's hiding out on a deserted island you can only get to by beating up every weird motherfucker you can find on a given cruise ship. Dynamite Cop is basically a carbon copy of Die Hard Arcade in every way that matters. It cleans up the graphics and the combat. The first game not only allowed you to hit your partner, but made it remarkably difficult to specifically aim at any one foe. But functionally, they're 2 sides of the same coin. Act 1 and Act 2 with a year-long commercial break. Actually, a TV episode is a good way to frame these games, because, like their pure arcade brethren, the House of the Dead franchise, the Dynamite Decas are ridiculously short. Both games, especially the second, are super generous with continues, and as such, both games together took us less than an hour to beat. Nearly every review I read from the time was like, yeah, it's fun, but seriously, it's 25 minutes long, with cutscenes, and I can't in good conscience ask you to spend $60 on this. I also couldn't ask you to spend $60 on this. I mean, that's almost $3 a minute. But for what it is, it's a good, stupid time, and worth playing if you have a friend who's similarly inclined. It is unequivocally a better Dreamcast deal than The House of the Dead 2, which also comes in under the length of an episode of Cheers, but is a light gun game, and as such, requires an extra purchase for an off-brand peripheral, or forces controller functions that defeat the purpose of the game. All you need for Dynamite Cop are your goddamn fists, and your feet, maybe a gun, which hilariously does exactly the same amount of damage as your fists. How about a grandfather clock? Or this psychotic napalm cannon that blows everything sky high when you use it? You got options, is what I'm saying. Dynamite Cop may not give you much bang for your buck, but it's definitely a charmingly silly good time. And if you and a friend are looking for a fun, goofy experience with a definitive endpoint, it certainly gives you value per minute. And in this era of games that demand you commit 100, 150, 200 hours of playtime to see all they have to see, it was honestly sort of refreshing to just get to sit down, turn my brain off, mount up, and share a hearty chuckle with a friend. Even if that friend is absolutely not John McClane. Next time, you know my main problem with fighting games? Too much foot traffic.